Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Good Old Podcast. I'm Jackie Franchuli for Wahoo's 24/7, and it's a packed show today. We're talking Virginia football and Virginia men's basketball. We have two guests coming on the show. Tim O'Malley, who covers Notre Dame for 24/7 Sports, will join the show to help us break down Virginia's game against the Irish coming up this weekend. And then Zach Carey from Striking the Lawn will join us on the show to break down Virginia men's basketball and what's the initial impression of Ron Sanchez's Cavaliers. He's been the interim coach for the first two games of the season. What stands out? All that is coming up on the show. But before we get going, why don't you go ahead and like this video, like this channel, so that we can continue to grow the show on YouTube. And then also, why don't you leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcast. So, like I said, a lot of things to get through. But first things first, Virginia football bounced back and ended a three-game losing streak after beating Pittsburgh, the top 20 team, last weekend.
I mean, we knew that we got four left, and we believe that we can compete in all four of them, but we can only do it one at a time. So just super proud of how everybody responded within the program over the last 2 weeks, and it was a lot of just reflecting and looking in the mirror and making a decision on how we wanted to finish out. So just super proud of this football team and this staff and everybody that supports us of how we handled the bye week, and we believe that we can win any game that we play, and so it's just good for these guys to come out and play well, find a way to win in an environment like this on the road.
I think that's just a testament to how much we prepared throughout these past 2 weeks. Everyone individually, offense, defense, special teams. I think we really invested in this game plan through the bye week and then throughout the preparation this week as well. So it's just us having confidence in what we're doing out there, having confidence in the schemes that we're running. Just going out there and playing football. At the end of the day, it's just a game. So, it's just honestly having fun, just taking advantage of the opportunities we get.
Like Elliott and the players said, this is an opportunity for Virginia to grow. It's an opportunity for Virginia to continue on this path. It was also a chance to show their improvements. That UNC game kind of was a game that, like I mentioned in the last podcast here, it was a kind of step backwards for this program that had been moving in the right direction. I mean, no one would have picked them to beat Clemson. There was a lot of, when you looked at that matchup, it was a game that was hard to see Virginia winning. Against Louisville is probably the game that they wish they had back. Virginia was the better team against the Cardinals and probably wishes that they can take that game back. But then UNC was a game that featured a lot of mistakes, a lot of uncharacteristic errors, and also it was a game that two of their offensive line starters did not play, with Brian Stevens and Ty Furnish. Those guys returned for the game against Pittsburgh, and they won the game in the trenches. They were able to cement that run game, which allowed Xavier Brown and Kobe Pace to kind of set the tone for Virginia on the ground and allowed them to win. I mean, they were able to hold the ball there in the late in the game for 8 minutes, which secured the win. I mean, by controlling the clock, moving the ball well, and giving the ball to Xavier Brown early rather than waiting till the second half really helped this team move over Pittsburgh. They also showed a lot more fight. That was one thing that I've asked the coaches and the teams about, how much this team has grown. During the game against UNC, if you remember, that first offensive drive ended poorly for them. And it felt like Virginia wasn't quite able to bounce back from that first snap for Virginia. But against Pittsburgh, it didn't end well either, that first offensive drive. Malachi Fields had 3 opportunities to catch the ball. The ball ended up in the hands from a Pitt defender, and Anthony Calandria was intercepted. But it was different. Virginia bounced back.
And throughout the whole course of the game, right, I was looking at the guys, and you didn't sense any, flinching of our guys, right? They were locked in, whatever adjustments we were making, communication and whatnot. And this was a belief, right? And that's one of the things we talked about. I have ultimate confidence in all of them as players, and they believe in themselves. And I just kind of put it together. We know it's going to be a 4-quarter game, and we didn't flinch.
It's kind of the mental resilience. Unfortunate play with Mal there. One that he catches 99 out of 100 times, and it's somewhat of a confidence builder too. We were able to drive it down. And the offense was going, what we were doing was working. So then you go back out and you still have that confidence. Whether it was one fluke play right before, you still got that confidence.
when I get to the sideline, you just see all the guys, like, we're not worried, where everyone's heads are up, especially coming out off that North Carolina loss that sucked. But over the bye week, we just knew that when something doesn't go your way, you just can't put your head down. You just got to keep going.
Virginia fought, and then Virginia won. This was a different performance from UVA, one that sparks a little bit more of confidence moving forward. Now, UVA is going to have tough few games here. They're going to face 2 out of 3 ranked opponents in the next few games. They obviously have Notre Dame, a top 10 team, on the road to South Bend. Then they have SMU, another ranked opponent, coming back to Charlottesville. And then obviously they end at Lane Stadium where they face a rivalry game against Virginia Tech, which honestly could be for bowl eligibility if both teams can't win ahead of that game. Virginia Tech is locked in at 5 wins right now. Virginia has 5 wins. So a lot may be riling in that last game of the season. But again, Virginia has 3 opportunities to secure a 1 win for that bowl eligibility. And like I said, in my 5 takeaways post game, and what I said earlier, one of the main takeaways is Xavier Brown and Virginia's ability to cement the run in that win. It was what led them to the victory against Pitt because it opened things up. But also seeing a guy like Jonas Sanker step up, I mean, he was given the Senior Bowl invitation earlier on Tuesday this week after his performance. I mean, and you see what he's been able to do. He was single-handedly switched momentum back to the Cavaliers in that third quarter, when in a span of a minute, he had a great stop coming off the edge. Then he blocked a field goal. And then a few plays later, he came back and he had a pick, which he returned for 45 yards. Jonas Sanker was the man who turned the tide to Virginia. It's just that the Virginia offense was able to capitalize on it. And that's why Virginia was able to secure their win. And now Virginia is able to have this opportunity to get 1 more win for bowl eligibility. And one of the things that we asked the staff this week was when Coach Elliott and Des Kitchings first came onto the scene, they said that they wanted to have a balanced offense. And I asked them, because now Xavier Brown and Kobe Pace are over 400 yards rushing. Do you know when the last time a running back had over 400 yards rushing for Virginia, or anyone had it? 2019. 2 guys? I think it's 2016. From last taking a look at the stat sheet. So it's been a while. So they were able to do that. And that's the reason why they've had more success this season.
There's been good spurts throughout the season, and I think Saturday night kind of really put it all together from that standpoint. AC was efficient, completion-wise, 68% completion. We had a drop or 2. We felt like we did a better job in the pass protections. This week creates a new monster. Right, and we do want to continue to build on being able to effectively run the football, be efficient throwing it, and hopefully eliminate the turnovers on the road. Top 10 opponent. I believe that's the formula to give us a chance to win.
The other reason why they had success against Pittsburgh, their defensive line had one of their best games of the season. So I know Tony Elliott explained that the reason why Terrell Jones got the start over Chico Bennett was a team rule. Chico Bennett unfortunately had his car towed, so he was late for a meeting. Not his fault. Obviously, the car was towed. He didn't know until the morning of. But following the rules, Terrell Jones started. And at the end, Terrell Jones made an impact. I mean, he was able to pressure up front. They also did a speed package where they had Cam Buller and Chico Bennett inside with Terrell Jones and Ben Smiley outside. And they're able to get more pressure against Pittsburgh. And that's a good offensive line for Pitt. So Virginia was able to get some more pressure, more push, which allowed the defense to be more successful. And that was big against Pittsburgh. And Virginia is hoping that they can continue that in the last final games.
Really, it was just a want to. We knew we've been getting challenged for the past weeks about we got to get to the quarterback. We got to be the one that makes more plays. We got to be the one that gets quarterbacks on spot. So we knew coming into this game, the quarterback could beat us if he was able to be controlled and, be normal in the pocket. So it was just like we had to make sure we did something about that. So it was just effort and everywhere. Everybody's just trying to get to the quarterback. Everybody's just trying to be around the ball at all times.
I think that if you can find ways to change pictures, post snap or present coverages that maybe a quarterback's not real comfortable throwing into, you have a chance to allow the pass rush to work, and compliment to our guys of being disciplined with their rush lanes, but then also finding ways to win their one-on-ones.
And now the Cavaliers are going to focus on number 8, Notre Dame, who has been on a 7-game winning streak after losing to Northern Illinois earlier this season. So Virginia is journeying to South Bend this weekend to face top 10 team Notre Dame. In order to help us kind of break down this game, we bring in Irish Illustrators Tim O'Malley. Tim, thank you so much for joining us today.
Sure thing, Jackie. Good to be back.
It's been a while since UVA and Notre Dame faced off against each other. What has been the biggest change for this Notre Dame's team, obviously apart from the head coach?
Yeah, it's the interesting thing is Notre Dame fans have been getting kind of annoyed by the fact that they're call it the rental quarterback, but I think they've gotten a little bit used to Riley Leonard the way he's been playing recently because they did since the last time, or I believe I guess when the last time Notre Dame played, it was Jack Cohn, and he was a 1-year graduate transfer.
Right.
Marcus Freeman's first year came up, and he did not get a graduate transfer, and he was ridiculed after the fact because he didn't get one, and both of those quarterbacks left. Then, of course, Sam Hartman, Riley Leonard. So I think the transfer portal is the biggest change since we last talked because Notre Dame got pretty active in it. They build still through recruiting, but they've done a good job of augmenting in the transfer portal defensively and, of course, at quarterback. And Leonard, after a tough start, especially a tough week 2, he's really improved. He's really underrated as a runner in all facets where he can. I mentioned this recently. He's their third down back. He can make guys miss, and he is oddly fast. Like, he covers so much ground when he runs. He's just one of the better runners they've had there, and he's improved as a passer because he was really struggling early in the year.
Yeah, actually, Virginia did not get the chance to face Leonard last
Oh,
time. He was.
It would have been a good day. It would have been a very good game. Virginia. This is a bad time to face Notre Dame. I'm going to preface the rest of my comments. In September, it would have been a really good game to face Notre Dame, I think.
Well, because he scored 22 total touchdowns this year, 9 in the air and 13 on the ground. And the last time Virginia faced Duke, Leonard was hurt. So they have not faced Leonard. So this is going to be an interesting challenge for Virginia, because Virginia has a lot of times struggled against those dual threat quarterbacks. And Antonio Clary has been ruled out for the rest of the season. And he was one of those guys, a safety, that what made Virginia so good against Iran, although they did do a good job against Pittsburgh this past weekend, his loss has certainly been felt when it comes to the running quarterback. I know you talked a little bit about Leonard and his improvement, but that's not the only thing that has improved for Notre Dame since the facing Northern Illinois, because they lost to Northern Illinois and then they've won 7 straight, scored 40 or more points. What else has changed?
Yeah, the offensive line coalesced. The beginning of the year, if all told, if you're including the starter that was the projected starter in August, they've had 9 different guys on the offensive line. They have since really stabilized. When they went to A&M, they had 6 collective starts on the entire offensive line when they opened the season at A&M, including 2 first-time starting tackles. The tackles are the only guys. The guys that everybody worried about in A&M are the only guys that have started all 10 games. Anthony Knapp and Emil Wagner. They have actually gotten older inside because they had a couple of injuries. They lost the starting center, replaced him with a former starting guard, and they replaced their young starting guard with a former starting guard. So Notre Dame got injured, lost players, and got older. It's one of the strangest transformations in an offensive line, but the line's playing a lot better than anybody expected it could have. It was named a semifinalist for the Joe Moore Award, and it's probably the biggest compliment you can pay Joe Rudolph, the offensive line coach. He's really cycled through, if you count, as I said, if you count their starting left tackle from August, 9 different guys, and to be a Joe Moore Award semifinalist. They're not a great Notre Dame offensive line like some of the best ones you see when they normally go to the playoffs, but it's a group that's way better than we thought they could be because they just started so inexperienced. So that's been a huge change, and I think Riley Leonard gained confidence because he just could trust the offensive line.
And on the defensive side of the ball, I find we're going to have 2 of the best safeties in the ACC, obviously for Virginia, Jonas Sanker, but Xavier Watts has been one of the safeties touted in the conference. How much has he grown this past year, and what have you seen from him?
Yeah, it was a big benefit that he came back. He won the Nagurski Award as the National Defensive Player of the Year last year. I think a lot of that was he had high-profile games. Like against Caleb Williams, he has 2 picks, a sack on Williams, and also forces a fumble for a touchdown. When people see that, and then they tune in the next week against Pitt, and he has 2 picks for a touchdown, that will help your candidacy. He's only going to end up with 4 or 5 picks this year, but he's a better player. All the coaches say He is now in charge of everything. He runs the whole defense. He's the voice of the back end. They'll use him blitzing in certain situations on third down just because he's a smart player. He's a guy that could be in the NFL. Physical gifts were never a first round draft pick, but he's put himself into that second round status by being a very good player. You asked what changed. Xavier Watts, when Notre Dame came to Virginia in 2021, was a converted wide receiver turned linebacker turned safety, making his first appearance against Virginia. That has changed the most. He was actually in that game, and he was the guy like, oh, they're going to try Xavier Watts at safety. Several seasons later, that can only happen because of COVID issues and things like that. He's still playing, and that's what's changed the most. He's probably their most decorated player he's definitely their most decorated player on the defense, but the defense has just been very good all year. They haven't given up more than 3 touchdowns since the end of 2022. So it's been 2 years, and that was Caleb Williams in USC.
You talked about what changed since the last time they faced each other, the portal, and it's like also what changed is some of these guys are heading into their mid-20s and still playing college football.
Yeah, there's some 6th-year guys at Notre Dame, actually.
Yeah, Virginia has one of those, defensive end Cam Butler. When he came in through the portal, he had 1 year left of eligibility. He's on his 3rd year with Virginia. So it's definitely an interesting time to cover college football, for sure. Obviously, there's some injuries. Antonio Clary is on the defensive side for Virginia, is going to be out. Any other injuries of note?
So Notre Dame had a big one this last week. They're actually a 6th-year senior, Howard Cross. He's another guy he was an All-American last year. Consensus All-American. He came back for a 6th year because he's a 6'2", 290-pound nose tackle, which sounds like it's 1980 to go to the NFL. So that's why he's back. He actually is out for this game. You heard it. He might be out for the Army and USC game as well. He hurt his ankle against Florida State. That's the most recent one. Notre Dame's early season was actually defined by injuries. 4 offensive linemen. All-American cornerback Benjamin Morrison is out for the year. Their 2 best pass rushers were out for the year since September, but they've grown a little past that, but we're wondering if the Howard Cross injury is somewhere there's a breaking point where if you're losing an All-American corner, an All-American defensive tackle, your 2 best pass rushers, another linebacker, like at some point there's a breaking point. We're not sure if it's there yet. I think if they were playing a top 10 team, this could be the breaking point for losing Howard Cross, but their D has played really well. Interesting though, and I know you're going to get to this, if they have a weakness on defense, it's that teams can run at them, like directly at them. They're a very fast defense, but actually Northern Illinois, it's not that they ran exceptionally well, it's that they stayed on the field when they needed to. Like they drove down 30 yards and converted to kick the winning field goal, something you never would have expected. And Florida State scored 3 points and had like a 65% rush efficiency, which makes no sense whatsoever to me. But they couldn't do anything else. So if you can be patient and run the ball, you can kind of have success against the defense that doesn't give up many points.
You led right me to it. Because Virginia's run game against Pittsburgh was the reason why they won that game. Xavier Brown had over 60 yards rushing. This is the first time for Virginia since 2019 they actually have a rusher over 400 yards, and they have 2 rushers with 400 yards of Kobe Pace and Xavier Brown. So that'll be the key for them. They need to establish the run in order to have any shot. And that's why they beat Pitt, because they had 1 possession that lasted for 8 minutes. And that was the keys to the game against the Panthers. When you look at this matchup, how do you see this just on paper when you look on Saturday?
I think that's a really good point. With having the 2 running backs they can go to helps a lot. Florida State's first drive was actually a 16-play drive, which is just, remember, that's a bad offense. It has happened a couple times against Notre Dame this year. Now, I don't want to oversell it because they usually give up they're one of the best defenses in the country. They usually give up 1 touchdown and a field goal, if that, in a game. But the patience of a running game with 2 running backs, it's probably the recipe to stay in the game against Notre Dame. But then you put game pressure on Notre Dame because Virginia wants to be in a 10-point game going into the 4th quarter. Notre Dame doesn't want that. Notre Dame wants to be up 24 points at that point. So I really do think that is the way to get to them for Virginia, and then Army following. And Howard Cross he's their starting nose tackle. And they replace him with a good player, but he's a 279-pound backup nose tackle. Now you can get washed out against a power running game in there. I'm not saying their defensive line is poor by any stretch, but you're down 2 defensive ends and now Howard Cross. So that can add up. I think that's Virginia's way to get there. The only thing is it's really hard to Al Golden, the defensive coordinator who's familiar with Virginia, or Virginia fans are familiar with Al Golden. He's really good at adjusting, and it doesn't wait till halftime. So Florida State had a 16 play drive. They held him to a field goal because Xavier Watts made a big play, and then that was it. He adjusts to it. That it's usually what happens. He's able to adjust on the fly. So that is going to be key, kind of like on the headsets. Al Golden going against Virginia, and you mentioned it was a huge game to save the offensive coordinator. I guess had one of his better days against Pittsburgh. He's going to need a good day against Notre Dame because Golden is probably. I hate to say I would vote for the Broyles Award because I follow one team. You should be a national writer if you're going to vote for the Broyles Award because you can follow more than one team. But he's got to be up for it. He's the key, and the defense has been the key for Notre Dame all year.
Yeah, no, Al Golden certainly has his reputation for being a good defensive minded coach. And for this game, he's going to have to scheme up, I guess, against a former player for Notre Dame. Chris
Yeah.
Tyree is obviously everyone's really familiar with him with Notre Dame as well here at Virginia. He came to Virginia, he got hurt, which is the reason why his stats aren't quite what he expected. He's finally back to health, and we saw the potential that he can bring against Pittsburgh. What has been kind of the feeling there? Has people been talking about the reunion of Chris Tyree returning to Notre Dame a little bit?
Yeah, because he graduated, this has kind of been Marcus Freeman's charge for the transfer portal. Once you graduate, he is very helpful with you trying to find another team if that's what you want. He's not big into it when you don't graduate. Chris Tyree graduated. He says, if you want to leave, I wish you well. I mean, he might try to talk some guys out of it, but he's adamant that he doesn't want them to leave when they're sophomores to stay with the process. We have a process for you. And obviously Notre Dame cares a lot about their graduation rates. So some of it can be lip service, but I do believe he means it a little bit. He mentioned, being careful with Tyree on kickoff returns. They know what Tyree can do. He had a couple really long ones for Notre Dame. He was a punt returner for Notre Dame last year as well. And actually, Notre Dame had a better, I guess, yeah, they had a better passing game last year because Sam Hartman was a downfield passer. And Tyree really developed last year. I thought he would have a little bit better year for Virginia, but as you said, when you get hurt and you're a speed guy, it also hurts when you get hurt, you're a speed guy, and you've been at a school for about 8 months because the connection with the quarterback is different. It's hard to, especially remember, he was a former running back. He converted to wide receiver his senior year at Notre Dame. So Chris Tyree is really liked by the media. I don't know if he talks to the media this week for the Notre Dame game, but he was mature when he was 18 on campus. So I think everybody really enjoyed dealing with him for 4 years. And he played quite a bit as a freshman in 2020. He was Kyron Williams' backup on the Rams, but Tyree was definitely the number 2, and he played quite a bit. So we've been talking to him for 4 years. So I think people will be happy to see him back in South Bend.
Yeah, Chris is always a great guy to talk to. And we actually be running a story on him and his return to Notre Dame on Why Was 24/7 on Thursday. So
we have to link that to Irish Illustrated because they would love it. He's a pretty popular player. And honestly, part of it is that when they graduate from Notre Dame, people have less hard feelings in the transfer portal. It's a nice thing. I hope it continues that way.
Yeah, same here at Virginia too. Most people are pretty I guess once you get that degree, you're part of the alma mater, you're part of the alumnus. So it's a little bit open. That's definitely a new thing with the portal. You see more animosity when it's like
the
you said,
freshmen are not well received. Yeah, when the freshmen
underclassmen definitely get more hatred on social media specifically. But Tim, thank you so much for kind of talking about the Notre Dame game. One final thing is a lot of Virginia fans might be traveling to South Bend. Any place where you suggest them to grab food or anything like that they should see?
Yeah, so the last time Virginia was here was in 19, I believe. So it was the beginning of or Eddy Street. It's south of campus. Eddy Street Commons has several restaurants and bars. So you're campus adjacent if it's Saturday and you're tailgating. That's a good spot. I would say you should have looked me up to stay in my Airbnb right off campus, but we do have someone staying there. So I meant to contact you and your fans about that one. But maybe next time they come into town, we'll do that one. If you're looking for kind of high-end, Cafe Navarre would be about a mile away, and maybe pop over the Irish Illustrated message board because we have plenty of people that love to help you with this public service act for the restaurants, I think. And also underrated Jesus, upscale Mexican in Mishawaka.
All right, awesome. Well, I will make sure to make sure people know that to come over to Irish Illustrated so that if they have any questions too about what to do in South Bend to reach out. So I really appreciate it.
Hey, thank you very much, Jackie. Should be fun.
And thanks, Tim, for joining us on the show to talk about the Notre Dame Virginia game. We'll be right back after this quick little break. And on the way back, we'll be talking about Virginia men's basketball. We'll have Zach Carey from Streaking the Lawn here on the show to talk about the Cavaliers. And welcome back to the Go podcast. I'm Jack Franchuli for Wahoo's 24/7. And just like I said earlier on the show, we're focusing on basketball for the second half. And we bring in managing editor of Streaking the Lawn, Zach Carey, to the show to help us kind of talk about UVA hoops. Zach, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me on. It's always a good time.
We've seen this new era of Virginia basketball with Ron Sanchez as the interim coach. Now we've seen them play twice now. And after watching them, 2 easy wins for the Cavaliers. And you can't really judge too much. You don't want to make big initial impressions, but I can say confidently that Day Ames provides a good athletic playmaker at the point for Virginia after watching him against Coppin State.
Yeah, no, it was really impressive, or it was encouraging rather, how he was able to penetrate that zone defense. I asked him after the game sort of, how he was focusing on hunting Virginia shooters, like most notably Isaac McNeely. And he was sort of talking about how important it is to touch the paint to then be able to do that. And I think that that was sort of the concern after game one. I mean, Campbell, that game was like a little bit close at the end, kind of odd, felt a little bit like, okay, maybe they should be running away. Campbell's a decent team though. And then it was good to see, Ames in his, increased role with Andrew Rhodey out, stepping up in that way. And he really is sort of the one player on this team without Jalen Worley now who can touch the paint like that from the perimeter. So yeah, encouraging signs from Day.
Yeah, Rhodey, it was kind of a little bit of confusion early on heading into the game because Virginia basketball's Twitter account tweeted out that Rhodey was going to start, but then the stat broadcast did not have him listed and ended up having a back injury during the warm-ups. He was trying to go and ended up not going. But although Ames got the start and we saw all that, it seemed like Ron Sanchez, although he had some good things to say about Ames, he also mentioned Rhodey's experience, which is why he chose him to start that first game. It makes me believe, Zach, that if Rhodey's healthy, he's going to be the starter.
I think so too. And I think one interesting point on that front is Coppin State ran a matchup zone for the full 40 minutes of that game. I think that allowed Ames to thrive a little bit more within the offense, because in a zone, it's more principle based. There's not as much sort of like specific stuff that you're running. So if a guy can beat someone off the dribble, use a ball screen, touch the paint, typically they're going to be more valuable just like in that way, rather than I think in their typical, new offense this season. Sanchez might trust Rhodey a little bit more to run that. I mean, it's a different system, but it's a similar system. And he's played a year in it. He has an idea of things. So maybe that's sort of where that experience line is coming from, and where Ron might still side with Rhodey. We'll see against Villanova on Friday how the offense looks, if it is Rhodey, and if they are, assuming that Villanova is playing man-to-man defense, who knows what's going on up there. But we'll see sort of, that will be a big test to see, okay, can Rhodey be better than he was against Coppin State, where he had an okay game, but just sort of a lot of errors late, especially. So yeah, I'm curious to see the decision making there. I think a lot of it might come down to the offensive scheme and who Ron trusts more there, though.
Yeah, Ames had no turnovers in the game against Coppin State.
Yeah.
Impressive. And I like the fact that he was able to get the ball down quicker. And I like that, in the beginning of the game, I understood what Sanchez talked about in emotion. And sometimes you get a little bit of nerve, you get a little bit uncomfortable there early on with the inexperience when you first start playing the game. But I will say something. They had open looks. The shots they were taking looked like there was good shots. And Ames was finding those shots and finding the good pass. So that was something that has stood out to me, that yes, they probably had a slow start offensively in the game, but at the same time, they were taking good looks and the passes were good from Ames. Now, the starting lineup obviously had Ames, Isaac McNeely, TJ Power, Elijah Saunders, and Blake Buchanan. That was your starters. I personally like, and we're going to talk a little bit more of the lineups here, I really am interested in their defensive lineup that we saw out there between Ames, McNeely, Saunders, Jacob Kofi, and Buchanan. I think that was a lineup that stood out to me as a potential when ACC kind of play starts and they wanted to kind of firm up things defensively.
Yeah, I think probably through 2 games, those are the 5 best players, at least in the way that they could actually fit on the floor. The question becomes, can Saunders guard threes and guard, sort of maybe I think he can do fine against wings. Can he do it on the perimeter against sort of big guards? There were some good stretches that he had because they entered the game with TJ Power guarding fours and Elijah Saunders guarding threes. And he had some good moments, a couple of slips there. So I think that's the big question mark there. And then offensively, do they have enough creation there? I mean, their new offense kind of, if they have a 5, which will be Buchanan, if it's not Buchanan, it's typically been Saunders. It's not as positionally oriented or not as important. There isn't as much of a split between 3 guards and 2 bigs as there has been in years past, which I think allows them to play Saunders and Kofi at the 3 and the 4. But I'm curious to see, because Saunders has been good in the post and limited touches because of his foul trouble against Coppin. No, actually, no, against Campbell. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that lineup works out. I think there are a lot of pluses just with the quality of the players, but how they sort of mesh together and how many minutes they get in non-con play might determine just how effective it can be this season.
So when we looked at this game, we had 2 leading scorers, and Elijah Saunders was 15, Isaac McNeely for 14. And when I look at this game, I see Isaac McNeely as one person in the beginning of the game. Although he had those 3 triples back to back to kind of turn the momentum of the game, kind of put that separation there. The one thing that still stands out for me about McNeely is he might get the extra pass in when he should take the shot. That I think that's something that it's still there. When he has a shot like the way he shoots it sometimes, I feel like he still needs to take the shot. And I think that's the hesitation is still there.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny to say that when he took 8 threes, but I completely agree with you. Like, there were a lot of times where it's like, especially early against that zone, as you said, where it felt like he could have just pulled the trigger. I think that might come down to a little bit for him, at the very least, of getting it through his head as a guy who's been in the Bennett system for 2 years, played very similar system in high school, to get shots up a little bit earlier. Don't always search for that great shot. If you're Isaac McNeely taking a 3-pointer within 3 or 4 feet of the 3-point line, and if there is not a hand actively blocking the ball, it's probably a pretty efficient shot. So he should continue to shoot more of those. I don't want him settling for too many mid-range jumpers. I think there's times he gets a little bit too happy, sort of pump faking and then driving and taking a 17-footer. But yeah, I mean, it was nice to see him. He sort of had that 4-minute stretch where he just took the game over, really on either sides of the ball. And it's been interesting to hear Ron Sanchez and then also individual Virginia players talk about Isaac defensively, which I think, he's always been sort of a good piece within the system. We're seeing him be a little bit more. I mean, obviously it's Coppin State and Campbell. There would be stiffer tests to come, but be a better on-ball defender who can impact the game in that way too.
Yeah, no, he definitely is one of the guys that has been standing out early on. We always expected Isaac Millie to stand out, but it was definitely someone that could switch the game for Virginia now, especially defensively now too. One guy that I feel like has been kind of stealing the headlines a little bit early on is Jacob Kofi. I mean, first game out, stood out, had double figures, and then he did it again, almost double figures, and did it again. He had 11 points, 11 rebounds, 4 steals, and 3 blocks. Yeah. So I mean, quite freshman, I mean, first year breakout for him. What kind of stand out for you when you see him?
Yeah, I didn't realize just how smooth he is. I think there's sort of this stereotype for Virginia bigs in their first 2 seasons that the game is just kind of too fast for them. We've seen it with a lot of different guys, or the physicality is too much. We'll see in ACC play. That's sort of the big caveat with everything right now, obviously. But I didn't realize he's had 2 transition dunks where he just stole the ball on a ball screen and then took it to the other end. And I mean, he had the reverse against Coppin State. I wasn't expecting, I thought he would be a decent 3-point shooter, but to be, I think, 3 for 4 through 2 games, that's impressive. And also the way he's flashed as a passer. He might not have the assist numbers. He had 2 against Coppin State. Not sure what he had against Campbell, but he's swinging the ball well when they're rotating it. He's, converting on high lows with Elijah Saunders and Blake Buchanan. He's just a really complete player. And defensively, he's so very active with his hands. We'll see if his combination of strength and agility can hold up potentially against 4s or 5s in the ACC. 4s, is he quick enough? 5s, is he strong enough? But he outplayed Blake Buchanan against Coppin State with 27 minutes to Blake's 19, and neither was in significant foul trouble, at least. So, yeah, I mean, he changes the calculus for this team in a lot of ways if he can continue to play like this, or even just, come back down to earth a little bit against stiffer competition. Jacob Kofi is a player to be really, really excited about if you're a Virginia fan.
Yeah, Sanchez pointed out that it was one of the things that he was still learning was defense, and defensively he was
Yeah.
more development. And I'm thinking, okay, if that's the case, he did a pretty good job for a kid who's still learning
Yeah.
defense against Coppin State. So definitely some good things to look forward to there. I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot, Zach. We've had 2 games under Ron Sanchez. We've seen a couple of these new pieces. Obviously, we still haven't seen Christian Bliss with his injury. He hasn't played yet, so that's going to bring a new wrinkle in when he's back to full health. But I want to give you a hot take. I want your hot take on
Okay.
this game of what your expectations or something that you've already seen that you're like, I can see this team doing this, or someone that you feel like is going to be the big star for this team this coming year.
Oh gosh, yeah, that's a good question. Trying to think through. I mean, we just talked about Jacob Kofi. I don't know if I want to. All right, that's not a fun hot take. I was going to talk about Jacob Kofi's NBA stock, but I'm sure that that's not necessarily a super fun storyline. Here's what I'll say. I think Ishan Sharma is playing 15 minutes a game consistently in ACC play this season. I think that Kane Murray had a tough game against Coppin State. He's a veteran. He'll bounce back there, but I think Sharma will probably jump Murray. And I think there's a world where he gets minutes over TJ Power at times because of Kofi's success in the front court. TJ Power will start to shoot the ball, but I think that Ishan Sharma is going to get minutes. He's going to get 15 to 20 minutes potentially in ACC play. I think he's going to be the 6th or 7th guy, one of the first few off the bench. I think that he's going to, I mean, we've seen him sort of on and off. He shot over 6 against Coppin State, so that wasn't as pretty as his debut. But I think as he gets comfortable in the defense and the presence that he brings as a shooter and also a little bit as a creator as well, had 3 assists against Coppin State. I think he's going to be, I guess maybe I'll say the third guard in the third guard in the rotation after Ames and McNeely, and then Rhodey behind him as the backup point guard. I don't know if that's a hot take, but that's where I think things are going to be trending soon.
I mean, when you saw him against Campbell and his quick release, you knew he's going to be a good player to watch. Maybe, I don't know about this year, but it definitely is someone who came in underrated. I feel like a lot of people talked about his raw talent coming into Virginia, and some people have, through 24/7 talked about the potential he's had, but said he needed maybe a year or so to kind of get there. But it seems that just coming in the offseason, working with Virginia staff, it seems to have already moved a little bit there. But Zach, thank you so much for joining and talking a little bit about Virginia hoops.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me on. It's always fun.
And thank you, Zach, for joining us on the show. It's always nice to have someone here to discuss Virginia men's basketball, and Zach does a great job over on Streaking the Lawn. Well, that's it for this week's episode. We talked a little bit of Virginia football, a little bit of Virginia basketball, and next week we'll talk more on Virginia football and Virginia recruiting, because Virginia is going to be busy over the next week because they'll be welcoming a lot of visitors for their last home game of the season. Don't forget, early signing day is earlier this year. It's that first week in December, so time is ticking away for them to secure those last high school prospects in the 2025 class. We'll have all the updates on who they're recruiting and who they're targeting and who is visiting that weekend on Wahoo's 24/7. But for right now, I want to thank everyone here for joining us on the show this week. We're going to take a few days and then we'll be right back here next week.